Hello there, and welcome to Sync Music Matters, a podcast that explores the beautiful relationship between music and the moving image. My name is Jim Hustvedt, and I'm your host on this journey, as each week I seek to understand the people and the process behind the best music in TV, film and games. I'm talking to composers, but I'm also talking to editors, music supervisors, directors, and anyone else who's involved with the synchronous process of pairing audio and visuals. Hello there. Welcome back. It's been a long time. About a year, 18 months, 2 years? I don't know. Too long. However long it's been, it's too long. But thanks for coming back. Thanks for listening. We're back with a vengeance with season 2, although it's not really season 2. It's just a continuation of season 1, but given the large period of time in between, I'm billing it as season 2. And I am thrilled to be opening up season 2 with Cristobal Tapia de Veer, who, if you listened to the first ever episode of Sync Music Matters with Stephen Warbeck way back when, we talked about Cristobal. We referenced him in relation to music that at that time was exciting us, it was inspiring us, and it specifically with regard to White Lotus. I don't actually think I'd seen White Lotus at that point. I think I'd literally just listened to the soundtrack, but it was fantastic. So yes, it seems very fitting that we open season 2 with Cristobal. So for those of you who don't know him, Cristobal's a Chilean-born Canadian composer and producer. He shot to fame in 2013 with his score for the deliciously sinister and mysterious TV series Utopia, which did very well, I think, all over the world, but certainly it was in the UK, was highly regarded. And it was one of those shows where, upon watching it, I had to Google the composer because it felt like something special was happening. It's an incredible score. Highly recommend you go and listen to it, and indeed watch the series if you haven't already. Since then, Cristobal has scored, loads of films. I mean, the 2016 film The Girl with All the Gifts. He's recently done Smile. He did an episode of Black Mirror, Black Museum. And of course, who can forget, White Lotus, both season 1 and season 2, for which he won a Primetime Emmy Award for Outstanding Original Main Title Theme Music. So that's to name but a few of his credits, but given his body of work, you could suggest that Cristobal enjoys making the viewers feel a deep sense of unease, but he does so beautifully and with a real sense of irreverence. So Cristobal Tapia de Veer, thanks very much for joining me.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
So the first question that I like to ask all of the guests on Sync Music Matters is, if we were to rewind to when you were maybe sort of 10 years old, around that age, and someone were to have asked you, what would you like to be when you grow up, what would you have replied?
Scientist or a musician? I suppose because there's it's somehow similar. In a way that I feel like I'm doing scientific experiments in the studio somehow. I mean, the idea of science, it was a kid's idea of, discovering things, inventing things, and things exploding in some laboratory and whatnot.
And was there something in particular that got you interested in science? Like books, television, people within your life?
I always liked experiments. So even the very basic stuff we did in school with, whatever chemicals, burning or, changing the color of your skin or anything really. I remember doing lots of experiments at home too. I like natural science also, and animals and dinosaurs and stuff like that. So I had lots of books about all of that, and but I don't know if I was really like being serious, like to become somehow a doctor, a scientist, or anything like that. I suppose it was more of a game in some way, like music.
Interesting as well with the idea of experimentation, because I would say that your music feels very experimental in that it dares to be different. It challenges maybe some of the norms. So do you feel that interest in experimenting carries through into your music?
You mean if it's a conscious thing of always going experimental?
Well, yeah, or I suppose it could be subconscious, but just your interest with experiments and trying things, and then that manifesting perhaps through creatively.
I mean, I suppose it's mostly the surprise event, and then where that event is going to take you next. Because if you find something you didn't know about or you were not expecting, or it's somehow like opening a door into a new thing, or a different reality almost, where you can go down that path and do all these new things because somehow you broke a wall or something like that. So I suppose making a good melody is as important as the way the melody is done or produced, or somehow I find the texture before the melody, and sometimes the weirdness or the novelty of a sound can justify going with a melody that is not that uncommon, or that is just a pop melody or pop series of chords that everybody knows, and there's nothing new about it. But the way it's done, it feels like, it feels to me like there's something new to it, or it sounds like the future, or it sounds like, we might be breaking something with the past, and now it feels new. Although we're playing with the same notes, in the sense that, I mean, I don't know how many. I don't know if you could say today that if you listen to mainstream music, if you're listening to any new melodies or any new chords or anything like that, and it feels like if you think you're listening to something really new, it's maybe because you don't know enough about history of music, or you haven't listened to enough music, or whatever. But it feels like everything is there already, and harmonically speaking, or theoretically speaking, it feels like, I don't know how to say. I mean, it's like human stories. I mean, films and everything, where it's always the same subjects that we've been dealing with since forever, and it's just the way that we present them to in a certain period of time that resonates with the people from that time. But it's always going to be us being angry or in love or sad, and it's all the basic emotions. And it feels music, the theory of music feels a little bit like that. Like it's always the same thing. We just, juggle, how you say, like you have, you juggle with the same things, and somehow try to come up with a different outcome that's going to resonate in the moment and whatever we're living in right now.
Well, I honestly believe that you do that. You do create something which it feels like it's not been done before, or it's a new take. And actually, it reminds me of a quote by Deadmau5. He said something along the lines of, all producers copy, but good producers copy in new ways. And it's the idea that, all the notes are the same. We're all using the same tools essentially, but hopefully we're combining different elements in different ways. We'll come on to the your creative process when we go under the skin, but because going back to when you were younger, so you wanted to either be a scientist or a musician. What were the stages? What were the steps that took you from this young boy who was fascinated by science and obviously music as well? What was the evolution to becoming a composer?
I think the composer thing happened just in 2012, really. Before that, I never had a notion of becoming a composer or writing music for images or anything like that. I suppose without thinking of that, I went somehow in that direction by producing producing instruments or experimenting with, I suppose, when I was like maybe 14 or something like that in Chile. I heard from an uncle, I think, for example, that he told me that you could turn a speaker into a microphone by rewiring the speaker or something like that. And I tried to do that. I took an old speaker that I connected to a ghetto blaster who had an input for a microphone, and somehow it worked, and I attached that speaker. I taped it to the top of an acoustic guitar that we had, and I was able to amplify the guitar. It was a really interesting sound. So I suppose I'm doing the same things today that I was doing when I was a kid, in that sense, because those type of sounds are never, there's no way to make them better. There's no betterizing those kind of experiments. For example, this speaker that I had, sometimes I would tape it to the floor. And when I would just tap with my foot on the floor, it would amplify through the ghetto blaster. And then I would blast, I would put the volume to the max, and it sounded almost like a hip-hop kind of sound, a kick drum, which was super interesting. And if I wanted to redo that kind of sound, I would do exactly the same thing, because there's no professional amplifier or this and that becomes somehow better. These kind of sounds are always errors or mistakes, or and they just happen, and you have a really interesting sound. I would do stuff like that, or I discovered that this ghetto blaster, I could, press on the record button halfway, and it would record too fast, so the cassette would go like twice the speed. So if I record my voice and then play it back at normal speed, then it would sound very low, so it would sound like a monster and stuff like that. So yeah, that's somehow the laboratory that I suppose I was it's like studying production techniques maybe or something, but for me it was just discovering or trying to find a way around not having proper instruments or stuff like that.
And so at what point, because you've had a number one in Canada, haven't you, with your band 1 Ton?
Yeah, it was it was a very pop band that we had. So yeah, it was somehow it was number one in many places in Canada. I think it did pretty well. We had some opportunities to play with some big acts. I remember we opened for Beyonce in Toronto, in the stadium of Toronto, and at that time I remember Solange, her little sister, was getting started, and she was opening too. So it was us, Solange, and then Beyonce. And stuff like that was really interesting to get to live things like that because like a stadium screaming at you when you play, particularly with those type of crowds, which is mostly kids and lots of girls. Because of Beyonce, and they would scream so loud you could barely hear what you're playing, and those experiences are really really interesting. And although it has nothing to do with the job of a composer, it feels to me like people who have done live, who know the stage and who know the bands and being on tour and stuff like that. And make albums. Those are to me the most. I personally connect more with those type of composers. So people who, Johnny Greenwood and Mika Levy and whoever, Trent Reznor, who bring a pop sensibility maybe into what they're doing, even though. Like Johnny Greenwood, he's mostly doing orchestral stuff and influenced by nothing like pop music. I hear lots of I don't know Messiaen maybe and this and that in his music, but still there's something about. There's something it feels very different about a composer, somebody who went to school to do this job and they do the job and all that, and somebody who improvised themselves as a composer, such as myself. I'm not sure. It always feels a bit pretentious if talking about what I do and I'm Mr. Composer and this and that. Because I don't feel any different than when I was just, working in a bedroom, making beats and stuff like that. I like to keep the same vibe.
And do you think it's interesting what you're talking about there? Because the idea that people who've played live or played music, I suppose, for the fun, do you draw a distinction between composing from the head and composing from the heart? So people who studied it would maybe take a much more intellectual approach to what is right and what isn't, whereas perhaps someone who hasn't studied it would be more experimental. Yeah.
There's something weird about the academic side of composition or planning. I remember seeing a video of Michael Dana about he was speaking about his score for The Life of Pi, and he seemed destroyed after this experience. The way he was talking about it is like this almost killed him. It was a huge movie and it took a very long time. But he explained that he had lots of plans with the director, and they did all that. They recorded lots of stuff, and somehow nothing worked. It was all very nice on paper, but somehow they were just not there. So you have a bunch of great ideas, which should work somehow, but that's the thing that's weird with academics is that there's no... for example, I think in this situation with Michael Dana, I think they went for the heart. They were really looking for the heart of the movie and the music. And in the end, there's lots of... I think they added maybe more pop things, more melodic stuff and whatnot. And this kind of connection is not the... I don't see that as much as the academic side of a composer, but it's almost the pop side where you're just playing a simple melody on an instrument, on a piano or something, and you want to connect with maybe a few people around you or with a crowd or something, and you're just sending this melody out to talk to someone. And and composition for film, it feels like I'm thinking too many things. Like, for example, if I think of a scene, if I would put a click track and say, okay, I found the tempo for this scene, and then I will start building some drums and this and that and some melodies or whatever. It doesn't feel there's not a sense of immediacy of capturing a vibe easily. Like, let's say if you have maybe a singer-songwriter and all you have is a guitar, and in the space of 20 seconds, maybe you find a riff and a melody that is it feels really like you're connecting with something and with an emotion, and you're connecting with people. So I guess there's a simplicity in there that is not calculated or overthought or too much planning or too much mathematics, this and that. And sometimes there's really weird ideas that work, I find, with images, for example. And you have to be open to let those ideas happen. And sometimes it feels like almost like you're cheating if you're not overworking something. So, for example, I would find an idea for a show or for a scene or something, and then I would send that to the director, and then I would keep working on that idea because I have all these ideas of how to make it better and this and that. And then I send the better, the optimized version to the director. And then it's like, oh, what happened? It's like we lost something. There was something there and it's not there anymore. And now there's all this stuff happening and it's complicated and this and that. So it feels almost like you have to get, or I feel like I have to get out of the way to not screw things up, to not, suck the life out of an idea. And then sometimes something that feels a little bit shaky or whatever, it really isn't. And there's some personal, insecurities and whatnot that you're throwing in there.
There's that. It's interesting as well because you've got that initial creative phase where you might just be working very rough, throwing down some ideas, and you're not really thinking about, okay, which preamps am I going through, etc., etc. Yeah. And then if ever you sort of decide to go back and re-record those bits, they're never quite as good because there was just some energy at the time when you were coming up with the idea, which then you're overthinking and can't quite recreate, which is, I think Adele is somebody who I think quite often her initial scratch vocal takes are the ones that make it onto the final recording because she just, in that moment, she captures something that she doesn't, later capture when she's doing multiple takes, etc., etc.
Yeah, there's something really weird about what you capture in the moment. Like I have maybe like I don't know 40 songs that I did at some point really fast because I was in some weird flow. I have this app to record on my iPhone where you can loop. So you record one loop and then a second loop, and I think you have like 6 of them or something like that. Very short loops. So. And I had a mandolin and a little charango guitar. And I started recording with my iPhone. So one loop would be this idea. And then I tried to add a second idea and harmonizing and this and that. So with the stock iPhone, recording with the mic and everything, and the iPhone is on my leg, just sitting there, and just grabbing ideas. And then I have all these songs, and and I think, okay, now I'm gonna really record them. I have the great ideas and this and that. I'm gonna make them sound good. And then I try that, and I have a tube mic and preamps and this and that. And first I'm trying to play it like I did, and somehow I'm unable to find a way. It doesn't sound as good. And then the microphone is supposed to sound better, but somehow when I go back and forth with the demo and when I'm recording, and something's missing, it doesn't sound so good. It's super weird, and there's been 8 hours of this when I'm trying to do something better, and everything sounds terrible. And this shitty recording on my phone, I realized this sounds really good. Actually, it's like I really appreciate there's something going on, and I'm unable to do anything better. So,
well, as you were talking about earlier, with with the ghetto blaster and like pressing the record button only half down to get the interesting textures. I suppose there's probably something interesting happening when the iPhone's just on your lap and you're playing in a relaxed way and it's recording it in a certain way and just sonically.
Yeah, it's very strange.
And so, was it a conscious move from, obviously you were performing live, supporting Beyonce, which is quite incredible. Was it a conscious move to then, it sounded like when you were talking to begin with, it wasn't a conscious move to move into composing. How did that come about?
I met with Mark Munden, the director from the Utopia director, the original one. I met him in Canada because he was shooting some scenes for this BBC show, The Crimson Petal and the White. And he heard, he was looking for composers, and he heard an album that I did, and he wanted to meet me. At that point, I didn't have anything to show as far as music for film or anything like that. But somehow he had this idea that I might be good for this with what he heard. So he went on a leap of faith, I suppose.
Yeah. And had he heard something similar to what we then hear in the Utopia score, or was it completely different?
No, it had nothing to do. At that point, I don't think I ever done anything similar to Utopia. I somehow found lots of things with that show. So yeah, that was my first contact with so how the world of film and series and stuff like that. And I guess it's the Utopia thing that transformed me into a composer, in the sense that when I did Crimson, so this was 2012 and Utopia was 2013. So when we did Crimson, it went pretty well, surprisingly, because I didn't know what I was doing, but people liked it. But it wasn't something like, when the show came out, then people were calling me and this and that and blah, blah. It wasn't something that I didn't feel like, okay, this is what I do now. This is, I just want to be a composer and stuff like that. This really happened the year after when he called me back to do the Utopia, and then Utopia came out. And the reaction, the connection with the world is is what felt like I don't need to do anything else. I don't need to even do solo albums, because it feels like that's what I'm doing. It feels like I'm doing solo albums, but it happens to work with the movie. So
It's funny as well, because when you were talking about the experimental nature of, turning a speaker into a microphone and playing with tape, it did make me think of Utopia, because there's so much interesting. It's almost like you've got highly texturized sounds in there that you've used rhythmically. So this sounds like there's almost like a recording on an old radio, or you've recorded yourself, slowed it down, and then put it in there. But then it's gated so that it comes in and out and is used as a rhythm. I mean, I could probably spend the next 2 hours going into detail on the Utopia. But were you taking that sort of experimental textural stuff into Utopia, because it very much feels like it, and obviously very rhythmical as well?
It's so abstract. It's so abstract when the ideas that I have to start getting into something, into a vibe, or I don't know. I'm not sure exactly why I brought like human bones and a rhino turd to London. When the first time I went to London to work on Utopia, and I stayed there for 6 months. And then...
Sorry, you brought... what did you bring with you? A rhino turd?
Human bones and a rhino turd that I brought from Zimbabwe.
Wow.
Because I thought... I could make sounds with that stuff, and bones. They sound. It sounds good, and blah blah. But it always feels like I could just grab anything and tap on that. I mean, if I felt like this cage for my cat is an inspiring instrument, because if I can play with sticks on it, and then I bring it to London. The sound of that thing is not what is going to be like. It's not an incredible sound that nobody heard before. It could be anything. It's just in my mind. There's it's like a creative seed. Like I can imagine things with human bones. With stories. Sometimes some of the shows or the films that I've done are really dark, and there was some really dark stuff happening in Utopia and whatnot. So there was a little element of danger with those bones somehow, and this and that. So I suppose it has something to do with ceremonial things. More than technically speaking, did I need the sound of a bone or
a rhino turd?
A rhino turd, does it change anything? Probably not. But the music I'm making, it's informed by those ideas. So the music is gonna be different because I'm thinking like that.
Yes.
Not because the way the bones sound or anything like that.
Yeah, that's really interesting, because so in one of the interviews I spoke to Isabel Waller-Bridge, and in terms of a starting point, what was very clear chatting to her was that she is very much focused on the starting point rather than the end product. And she finds not necessarily in musical, but will literally go into a book and pick a word or poem and pick a phrase and use that as a starting point. And she's very much, okay, where am I beginning with this? And less worried about where she's going. Obviously, you have to be conscious of where it's going and whether it's right for picture, etc., etc. But it sounds also that's similar to what you're saying there, which is ceremonial is an interesting word as well, which will, I think, probably segue nicely into White Lotus. But just the starting point of human bones, ceremony, and as you say, I mean, Utopia was dark. It was very dark. So having sort of dead human remains as a starting point for the series probably is very apt. Great. Well, yes, ceremonial is interesting. So it's probably a good time to go under the skin of White Lotus. Under the skin. So the White Lotus score, I thought, also felt quite ceremonial. In that all the way through, there's this. It's sense of foreboding that something's around the corner, that something's and obviously the program itself is drawing on. There's an undercurrent of white people building big fancy hotels and having native Hawaiians dancing in front of them, which is kind of ceremonial. So what were the starting points for any turd involved in the starting points for White Lotus, or what were they? Did you have certain things that you took with you that inspired White Lotus?
White Lotus, it was kind of a surprise project for me because they called me and then I met Mike. I mean, we had a discussion, and then I was working on it for like 4 weeks maybe, and then we were at the mix, and everything was so super fast.
Wow, 4 weeks.
It was really last minute. I'm not sure why. I think they were looking for a while for the right music, and somehow he ended up with a track using my score for that I did for Black Mirror. He was using that all over the place, and it's the main thing he found that he was really happy about what that was doing to the show. So that's why they called me. And it was last minute, and I had a few weeks, and there wasn't that much time for thinking. Okay. Outside of the conversation with Mike, speaking about doing some kind of Hawaiian Hitchcock and this and that. I naturally went for percussions, I suppose. I just started jamming, recording like that was the plan, but I didn't really have a plan. But I know I didn't have time, so I just started playing right away. And I spent days just adding tracks on top of tracks, jams of percussions, mainly. And then some flutes, have lots of native flutes. So I started experimenting with that. I just like the connection with nature, with all of those things, and with the locals. And even though the music I was doing is not Hawaiian, it's more the idea of primitive music, and the shock, the clash, with the tourists, with the rich people and all of that. But it was a vague idea, and somehow in the end, it was maybe luck that everything worked out, because with no time like that, there wasn't a B plan. I couldn't do a redo, a completely new score 2 days before a mix, and it had to work somehow. So
so that was in many ways that was a blessing, was it? The fact that you didn't have time to overthink it. So going back to what you were saying earlier, you just had to go with it.
And then I was somehow finding, as I was doing stuff, why it was important, or why it was interesting, and how the way it worked with the characters and everything. There's absolutely no plan behind that for it to work the way it works. It's somehow it's just a spontaneous thing that it just happens, and then afterwards, all these words start appearing with people talking and interviews and questions and stuff like that, and I have somehow to find things to say about it, but it's really I mean, I'm not sure, but it feels to me like lots of musicians are more spontaneous than they sound where they're explaining what they did.
Yeah.
It feels like you could say so many deep things and whatnot about what you do and blah blah. But it always feels like you're somehow inventing a story where there's something there, but it's subconscious. I think the artist's job somehow, or the musician's job, is the good stuff. It happens in a unconscious or subconscious way. You somehow let it pass through, which is somehow what we were talking earlier, where you don't want to sabotage the good stuff with a bunch of ideas.
Yeah.
So it feels almost like you can almost not take credit for what you're doing, in the sense that I think my main credit is that I allowed some stuff to happen that people liked, but I was able to get out of the way and let that breathe without killing it. So maybe that's more the talent, that I organize all this stuff because I'm a mad scientist and everything is mathematics and everything is just genius.
Yeah.
I don't know.
It's interesting because Rick Rubin talks about this in his new book about creativity, and I think Elizabeth Gilbert in Big Magic as well, is the idea that as a creative, you are merely a conduit for. It's almost like there are millions of ideas or inspirational ideas floating around in the ether, and as a creative, you're a conduit. So first of all, you have to be open to receiving the idea, and then you're the channel for the idea rather than really doing anything. And that sounds a little bit like what you're talking about there.
Yeah.
And as well, that the idea that ultimately we're just making it up as we go along, but then in an interview afterwards you can make it sound highly considered and intellectualized, when actually it was just. And you mentioned flow as well earlier. Is that it sounds like as well that there's almost a flow state for you that you get into where you're not overthinking things, you're just allowing it to happen.
Yeah. I lately, in this last couple of years, I've been trying to find ways to even work in a easier manner, where in the past, let's say I've been working for 5 days on a small idea and trying to make that perfect. And I've been trying to walk away from that, because when I think of all those moments of overworking something, it never ended up in anything good or anything really interesting or memorable or whatever. So it's interesting that you have to find a way to make your life easier, to do stuff and let it be, and just move on and maybe check it afterwards a little bit, but yeah, let it have a life of its own. And somehow, in general, when I have a balance like that works, I just feel better. I feel healthier, and the music sounds better and everything. So somehow this overworking thing and torture and whatnot, I think it's somehow a mistake. And I feel like an artist needs to find a way to not go into that thing where you're self-destroying. And if an idea needs so much work and so much preparation and all that, maybe it's unnatural. Maybe there's an unnatural idea there, and it's just not supposed to be. But I mean, it's there's I don't think there's any rules that really work. Sometimes you have to work stuff a lot more than something else. But yeah, and suffering. I mean, of course, suffering it's an important thing. But I think that's a mistake too. Thinking of I'm really suffering making this song, but it's not the same thing suffering in an academic way because you're overworking something, or suffering because something terrible happened to you in real life, and then you are putting that into a song. I think there's two different things. And so you think you need to suffer to do something good. Yeah, but you need to live to do something good. To suffer in the studio is a weird thing. It feels like masturbation somehow. It's just a bunch of ideas, and it's just nonsense.
Yeah, there's that kind of almost cliche of the tortured artist, that someone has to put themselves through hell. But I think what you're touching on there is it's one thing to have had have suffered and to take that suffering and put it into your music. It's another thing to be working on a creative process and suffering at the same time because you're putting too much pressure on yourself, or the idea's not right, and you're flogging a dead horse or whatever there is. Something you mentioned earlier as well about, and this is something again actually we touched on with Stephen Warbeck. He was struggling to. There was a particular director who was struggling to get an idea across, and everything. She was French, so she was very. There was none of this sort of like, I really like it, but it's more a case of no, it's not good. And so it was actually when he sat down at a piano with her, and rather than recording it, actually performed it and had so not relying on click, which we sort of touched on as sometimes, and you mentioned this earlier, as sometimes putting on a click track it can be stifling because you're not feeling it in the moment. How do you manage that? Because obviously I think a lot of particularly Utopia, but White Lotus as well, and a lot of your scores are very rhythmic. How do you balance that in terms of not restricting yourself by having a very rigid metronome, but at the same time making sure that it's working to picture?
I suppose it depends on the project, but in this case, there's lots of rhythmic, there's lots of pulse going on. So I suppose it's more a case of if the music feels like it's the right mood for any particular scene, and then we go from there. So if I need to score particular moments in one scene, then there's so many tweaks that could happen. From moving the song to the left or to the right. Sometimes I do that until there's enough punches and holes in the music that have something meaningful to say about what's happening to the characters. And when that's close enough, then I go from there. I placed the tune somewhere, and then I'm gonna rearrange around that so that I'm hitting the right spots, and then going down in another moment and whatnot. So there's lots of improvisation with that, and sometimes the music is close enough to be scoring a scene, and it doesn't need to be that it doesn't need to be that precise. The scoring, everything that's happening. There might be just one punch that's important. I suppose I just play with the arrangement. But for me to pick a song for a moment, that's just the feeling of the song. Whether it's really the right, if it's gluing to the emotion of the scene.
We'll be right back after a quick message from our sponsors. Of course we won't. We're not corporate sellouts here at Sync Music Matters. We wouldn't dream of having sponsors, unless, of course, they wanted to throw large quantities of money at me, in which case I'm all ears. But no, as a quick aside, if you enjoy the podcast, if you enjoy the show, and could just pop onto your preferred podcast platform and give us a quick rating and a review, it just helps AI know that this show is worth listening to, and also makes me feel a little bit warm and fuzzy inside. Thanks very much. Let's get back to it. when it comes to something like White Lotus, obviously season 2, I was hoping to have started watching it this weekend, but I didn't get a chance. So I think tonight I'm going to start on season 2. How do you go from, Emmy Award-winning score White Lotus 1, and there's obviously been an evolution, because I've been listening to the score on Spotify. In fact, weirdly, both of these series, I've listened to the scores before I've even seen the series. But how do you evolve it? How do you sort of keep... Because there are elements of season 2 which feel, that have transferred over. But how do you approach the evolution of that, of tapping into something which worked really well, but then allowing it to evolve naturally, and obviously different setting? We're in Italy this time.
I think is the theme maybe defines somehow the sound, because at first I wasn't supposed to be on the second season. The first season, it was supposed to be a mini-series. And it's because of the popularity that they switched it to a series. So I wasn't really sure I was going to do a second season. I never do second seasons outside of Utopia, maybe. And I had lots of projects, and I didn't have that much time, but they asked me to do at least a new theme adapted to the new location. And it's because of the concept of the show that, every season is going to be in a different country, that there's an open door there to changing stuff. So after 8 seasons or something, it's always the same theme. It's always the same sound, and whatever. And now it feels like season 2 is almost like it's not a new theme, but it feels pretty. It's really, really different, I think, from the first one. So for the theme, I talked with Mike, and we spoke about some Renaissance, some Italian opera elements and whatnot. So at some point, I tried to just make a mock-up of some Italianish sounding music with some opera and then some harp and stuff like that. So I started that somehow like in a light-hearted spirit. I wasn't trying to, do Puccini or whatever. So it's a bit of a joke and a remix of the first season. I wanted to put a bunch of samples together and to try to do something like a Daft Punk remix, where I recognize that it was that song, but it's just a remix now. And but somehow. Once I had that intro, which has absolutely nothing to do with the first season, I started looking to how to make it recognizable. So I brought back the voices from the first season, which are instantly recognizable, even though the melody is not exactly as the first season. It's somehow recognizable because of the sound of the voices. And I started tweaking the song so that it starts becoming something else than the intro, and somehow is like this is the White Lotus heroes, or whatever you want to call it, that are appropriating this new place, this new vibe and whatnot. And we go into this club moment, anthemic thing. So, which, I don't know, maybe is, the tourist appropriation of the place or whatever, or destruction. But
it seems to be a theme that runs throughout White Lotus, is the impact. Tell me, the voices, is that your voice pitched up, or is it...
No. That's her name is Stephanie Osorio. She's a Colombian singer.
Okay.
And this particular voice, I was just making her record interesting sounds to me, and one of those sounds was her doing one note, and it was long enough that I could play with it. I put it on a keyboard, and I came up with the melodies, and the harmonies and whatnot. So yeah, once again, it's one of those things where we were in a studio. I rented the biggest studio in Montreal to do this a vocal session because I wanted a big space. I put lots of mics in this place in case I wanted to record the voice from far and stuff like that. But then we're there and she's recording all this weird stuff, and the engineers that are there, they're like. They don't understand what's happening. You know why I'm paying for the biggest studio to record all this nonsense that I could be recording in a bedroom, in an apartment and whatnot. And she didn't know what I was doing with that either. And then years later, somehow the tone or the attitude in this voice. And then jamming with it on a keyboard, and somehow these things appear, and it really felt like something. It hit me like something important. The way this sounded, like this could be a major event in a song that I could make.
So the vocals weren't recorded for White Lotus; they were recorded at one point, and then later you decided. Oh wow!
Yeah. I had those for years, and I had. Those particular harmonies I had for a couple of years because I think in 2018, I don't know anymore, a few years ago, I went to LA to work with Kanye West, and this idea is the first time I jammed with those voices. I was in a hotel and I was jamming with a little keyboard, and those harmonies, those melodies appeared. But this I never gave it. I never gave it to them or even showed to Kanye or whatever. So it was on my bank. For a long time, and this show seemed to be because I mean these voices, they are what they are. It feels like a war cry, like something coming out of the jungle or
ceremonial.
Like a ceremonial, and they had and so it was the perfect fit. When I tried this for the White Lotus, I was really hoping I could use them because it feels like such a strong hook. And it's not about the melody. I mean, throughout the song, the melody is always changing. So there's not like one particular, three notes that you can, this is why this is a hook. Even in the new version, the harmonies are evolving from the beginning until the end of the song. It's not like a repeating always the exact same melody. But there's something about the way these voices are screaming or something. There's an energy there, something that feels special.
Yeah, no, definitely. And it's interesting as well because often we think of a hook has to be a recognizable melodic motif, but actually quite often a hook is an interesting texture or even rhythmical. I mean, even the drums that you use in the White Lotus score, there's this obviously some big boomy bass drum as well, which keeps coming back and is recognizable. And so it feels like there's a lot of hooks in there, and it's not just the preserve of the melody. You mentioned your bank. Do you have a big bank of like old session recordings and samples and things that you've recorded yourself that you go to for inspiration?
Yeah, I have lots of stuff. And with every project, I experiment so much, and I end up using maybe 10% of all the stuff that I did for that project. So there's always the laboratory part, and there's going to be lots of material that happened there. So yeah, I have tons of sessions and demos and whatnot, and even the Utopia theme. It's an idea that I had for years. The hook, like this synthesizer, and that when I was doing Utopia, I reopened that session, and it feels like an interesting idea. But it's funny because it's one of those things that it felt like maybe it was unimportant in the way that I did it, because it was very fast. In like 5 seconds, I found this bass line, the Utopia thing, and I left it there. It felt like something interesting, but it felt like a joke at the same time. But somehow with Utopia, I made a track. Then I sent it to them, and then the editor was tripping. He was, and then he put that at the beginning of the show, and blah blah. And sometimes looking at them using the music or having their feedback, I realized something it might be more important than I thought. Like, and then I realized, okay, this bass line is really cool, actually, this Utopia bass line. But I wasn't 100% sure about anything. I mean, I was very insecure about everything, really, because this show, I remember it came out in January, and when I was going to come out, I was terrified. I thought everything was too weird, and that I thought in Britain the critics. Because some, like the Crimson Petal, that it wasn't the craziest score ever, but I think somebody in the Telegraph or whatever, they were very critical about it. So the weird sounds and this and that. So then Utopia, I thought, okay, they're going to say that I'm destroying the show with this weird, fucked up music, and it has nothing to do with anything. So that was my vibe when the show was going to air. You never really know anything.
And how was it received critically? The score for Utopia, how was that received critically?
It was really well received. It was really surprising.
Good, so they don't always get it wrong.
I mean, it's the reason why I have a Twitter account now, because the director calls me and he was talking about the music. He was saying, people are tripping. The music and this and that and blah blah. You should go on Twitter. There's this guy from Duran Duran, whatever his name, Simon Le Bon, the singer from Duran. He's speaking about the music for Utopia and blah blah. I opened an account just for that, just to check what's going on, and I realized it was a bit of a hit, in the sense that it wasn't a BBC One thing that is in everybody's faces with the promotion and whatnot. It was a small show, but it certainly felt like there was a cult building there.
Are you aware that on TikTok there's been lots of remixes of the White Lotus 2 theme song?
Yeah, I saw some of that stuff. There was an article, I don't know which publication it was, but somebody presented that as like I was somehow an expert in TikTok or something. like this thing was really made for the TikTok generation.
Yeah.
I have no idea about that. Maybe it's a playfulness. Maybe if people feel like they can play with it or be playful with that, like it's a game, maybe that's why it works for TikTok. I don't know. Who knows? But yeah, it appears that I'm an expert in TikTok.
You know how to go viral on TikTok. You've got the formula. Yeah. Well, I think it maybe speaks to the maybe the playful nature with which you make music that resonates with other people. Getting a taste. Interestingly, with all the people that I've interviewed, it always seems, for the podcast, but also when I'm just talking to people generally, it seems as this formative period from maybe 10 years old through to mid-20s where people are heavily influenced by the music that they listen to. What were you listening to when you were growing up that you feel has helped inform your creativity today?
When I was like before 10 years old, it was mainly music I would hear, like family would be playing. So there was always a blend of classical and some folk music, I suppose, a bit of everything.
Was that music that they were playing on vinyl, or were they actually jamming and playing?
So playing that on on a stereo or vinyl or whatever, but also the live music, which is mostly as part of the culture in Chile, which it involves always somebody playing a nylon string guitar and people singing some folk, some traditional stuff, or for parties or stuff like that. But when I became more, when I started appropriating myself of the ghetto blaster and recording tracks from the radio, stuff like that, it was maybe around 10 years old. And I would listen to anything that I liked on the radio and record that. Like I was a fan of Michael Jackson. I suppose one influence, in the sense, somebody who sent me in a particular path, I would say, I met my best friend at some point when I was like 10 years old or 11. And he was into heavy metal, and he would laugh at the stuff I was listening to, like Michael Jackson and pop music and stuff like that. And he would say that he's all shit. And he was that kind of guy. Even at that age, he was pretty edgy and stuff. So he would show me Iron Maiden and then Ozzy and all that stuff, and then Metallica. And when I got into metal, it became that extreme thing where you're always looking for the more extreme new band. And then, Slayer came out, and it was faster and angrier. And then there was death metal and black metal. So it was really like, it's almost like a sport, looking for the faster drummer and this and that. So I think that's the first time I was influenced by someone and got into a style, particularly where there's only heavy metal and everything else is shit and whatnot. So that went on for a little bit. Then I suppose I started getting into, Led Zeppelin or stuff like that, which I suppose my parents would listen, or family would listen to when I was a kid. But I don't know. I mean, I suppose there's particular things of being born in South America, in the sense that, for example, our relation to folk music, to local music, is not a good relationship. At that time, it wasn't, in the sense that everything that was in English or on the radio that comes from the US or the UK or whatever, that's the main thing. That's the good stuff. That's the important stuff. And like if you put some, folk Chilean music or Peru or whatever, it just feels like loser music. It wasn't like, no, this is not the cool stuff. The cool stuff comes from somewhere else and whatnot. So there's somehow a little bit of a rejections of where you're from and whatnot. But later, I mean, that changes with time, and then at some point, I realized, well, the richness of that heritage and all of that.
Well, it is, I think something that almost do hear recurring in quite a lot of your music is that the almost offbeat that's which is almost reggae or maybe even reggaeton. So I did wonder whether there's that South American influence has come in.
I don't know how conscious I am that if something is like a Latin influence.
Yeah, I suppose the point is it could be completely subconscious, couldn't it? It's just if you've grown up, whatever you've grown up listening to, you've assimilated and taken on, and maybe not even on a conscious level. In terms of watching television or movies or TV series, were there any kind of seminal moments there where you saw something? I mean, obviously, from what we talked about, there was never really much of a consideration to, I'm going to be a composer. It evolved, but were there things that you were watching when you were growing up which made you sort of double take and go, wow, that's really cool, and you think may have... Because it strikes me, there's, with a lot of your music and a lot of your scores, there's almost sense of unease, and quite often that's what the music is trying to do. It's trying to create that sense of unease around whatever's happening visually. But were there things that you think you've watched which have influenced that? I mean, was horror a big thing for you growing up?
Yeah, I always like horror since I can remember. But I don't remember horror music being an influence at all. I think the unsettling vibes or stuff like that might be a personal thing. Just something I'm somehow looking for, or not looking for, but looking to express, I suppose. So maybe I pick projects that allow me to express that. And that might be just a reflection of personal experience, like just life experience, just childhood and whatnot. So, but not. It's not a conscious thing where I was, really influenced by the let's say horror music or I don't know, hardcore cinema, or I don't know what. It's just a natural thing that I gravitate to.
Yeah, that's interesting, because I often think about the creative voice, and that every artist or creative has a creative voice, and sometimes there's almost feels like there's a journey to. Somebody introduced me to the concept of you don't have to find it because it's within you. It's a question of hearing it. But it sounds like listening to you that there's not been any sort of conscious search for a creative voice. It's always just been a very natural expression of what's inside you at any given time, and probably has evolved over time, but is just very organically.
Yeah. Well, I think listening to people helps a lot, in the sense that music, for me, it feels like a necessity. And since I'm making music to connect with people, then it's, directors and producers and the people I work with, they help me realize throughout the time I spent doing this, I learned like everything about the what I'm doing or what's important about what I'm doing, or why something that I'm doing connects, and blah blah and so on. So this dialogue is been super important for me to understand. To maybe feel more comfortable about the sound that I do, but to maybe to be also conscious what's important in there. But I mean, I don't think it's I don't think it's a lonely. I mean, it's lonely work in the sense that you spend so much time alone working in a studio, but it's not lonely in the sense that it's so dependent on the feedback and how it connects with people. So it's really a communication tool for me.
Yeah, a very collaborative in nature. And you mentioned briefly earlier about the Utopia. When it came out, you were a bit worried. And obviously, it turns out there was no need to be worried. A bit like when George Lucas went on holiday when Star Wars was going to be released because he was worried it was going to flop. Do you still, when you're submitting cues, do you still have that? Do you second guessing yourself, or have you reached the point where you're sort of like, yeah, this is right, or is there still that underlying like, oh, I hope this hits what they're going to think?
There is a moment where it feels like. I nailed this cue, and it feels like I'm pretty sure that everybody's gonna love them in the production. There's moments like that, but there's always that never changes. There's always these things that I'm sending somehow reluctantly, and then I realized it was the right movie because it was like just the thing that we're waiting for, and that I was not sure about. So I suppose in a way that makes me take myself less seriously, and I try to take nothing too seriously because this stuff, you do something, you don't know if it's any good, and you somehow have to send it and see if it has a life of its own, if it can, if it can find a way with people and whatnot. And when it does, it just feels really interesting. It's almost like, I don't know, it's like putting a life out there and it find a way to live, and you leave it alone, and it's great. And then they tell you, this life, this is amazing, this works for us and we can work with it, and it's great. But the fact that I don't know that, it's like it's just there's so much guesswork and just trusting a tiny instinct that maybe you have to do this even though you're not sure, and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think that's a hugely important lesson in creativity generally, is being unattached to the outcome, because as you say, like whether something's good or bad is highly subjective, and it's not necessarily whether it's good or bad, it's whether it's right, and you only find out by putting ideas out there and all these lives, as you call it, putting that life out there and seeing whether it's right for the production. Amazing. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to chat. It's been absolutely fascinating getting to know you and the process. I'd like to finish off with a couple of quick fire questions. The first one, this is the serious deep part. What's your favourite biscuit or cookie?
I like cookies with cream in the middle.
You thinking Oreo or custard cream? Do you get custard creams in Canada? That's a very British thing.
Really? Yeah. I'm a fan of custard cream, but I don't know any biscuits with custard cream. I'm going to have to try that next time.
Yeah, hey, next time you're in London, go get a custard cream. Well, I have to say I'm not a massive fan of them, but they generally turn up as a firm favourite. And in fact, I wouldn't be surprised if Prince Charles has custard creams at his coronation. That's how staple they are. What scares you?
Corporative people.
As in corporations? Or
corporations, yeah.
Right, okay. Yeah, big, yeah, okay. we won't go too political, but I hear you on that front. I'll give you, so the other question, the final question is, what advice would you give to your younger self?
To trust it, to in the sense of not trying to be in control, because somehow things worked out, which is something that you hear often, but it's somehow abstract when you hear that, when somebody tells you that, you know how that works exactly.
Yeah.
So I suppose is really to find, for me, what feels like the truth and sticking to that, even though sometimes you don't have the support around that. But if it really feels like the right thing to do to me, sometimes I would do something that on the spot seems really weird. And then a year later, I realize what I'm collecting because of that, what the amazing things that happen because of that. And sometimes it has taken many years for something that I thought I did a mistake about something, and it really wasn't. So yeah, it's hard, but to find that inner voice that says the truth. Because everything it's so foggy out there.
Yeah, I think it is abstract, and it's hard. It's hard to, you can understand it intellectually or rationally, but it's hard to implement, isn't it? But I think the more you go through those experiences, and as you say, you can look back and see. Even the times that are very difficult, adversity, you can, at the time, it's very hard to see that this can have any benefit or that you should trust the process. But then when you look back, there's always a lesson in there, something comes from it, and just trusting that that will be the case. But yeah, amazing. Well, Cristobal, thank you. Merci beaucoup. Thank you so much for taking time to chat. It's been absolutely fascinating.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
Thank you very much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, and given that you've listened this far, I feel you might have, then I would be honoured and incredibly grateful if you could take a moment to subscribe, rate and review on your podcast platform of choice. By subscribing, you'll automatically be notified each time a new episode drops, and by rating the show, you tell the artificial intelligence that will soon be running the world that this podcast is worth listening to. I certainly get a lot of insights and value from these conversations, and I genuinely hope you do too. If you'd like to get in touch with the show, then you can email me, podcast@larpmusic.com. Larpmusic.com is my digital abode, and the home of the podcast is larpmusic.com/Sync Music Matters Podcast. And Sync Music Matters Podcast is hyphenated. Thanks again for listening, and until next time.